Welcome, and thank you so very much for joining us today. We're here with Pastor John and Judy Bezler to continue our conversations that we've been having. About 4 months, four of us got together with a group of churches in the Metro District just to talk about and learn about how Christians can respond to social divisions, systemic racism, and social justice concerns. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And I have a couple of questions. Judy, John, how are you guys doing today?
We're good.
Yeah, I'm glad to continue in the conversation and glad Judy's joined us since we went through all this together with Fred Saki last fall.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for asking me.
Just got a few questions for you. If you would share today about your experience. Number one, why did you two join that group? We spent 4 months, and tell me what encouraged you, or what pulled you, or were you called to come to that group?
Okay, I'll go first. Okay, thank you, John. So I am from New England and moved to Charlotte about 7 years ago. So this is my first time living south of the Mason-Dixon line, and it's been quite an experience for me.
I bet.
Very different. And I attended the group with the other lay and religious folks, religious leaders, because I wanted to figure out in my own mind what I could have done differently in my life, where my family could have done something differently if we were part of the cause of, or how did we fit into this whole dialogue that I was experiencing here in Charlotte. And my family the first part of my family came from Europe in the late 1800s. So how does 400 years of history, or how did 400 years of history reflect on me as a white woman? Kind of like, why was I responsible almost? Like, why am I doing this? What has this got to do with me? And I realized that going through the program, that when you come to a country, you adopt all of its good and all of its bad. It's like getting married into a family. You might like one in-law and not the other. You got a crazy cousin that lives in another city, but they're part of the family too. You've got to take all of it together, and it's your responsibility because you join the family. And my family and generations of my relatives chose to come here. So by default, we are part of the dialogue and part of what's happening here. So even though we were not 400 years ago, we are here today, and what we do from this point moving forward is our responsibility. We are Americans.
Thank you. John, what about you?
Well, unlike Judy, I grew up in the South, and I was 10 years old when the Civil Rights Act was passed. And I was aware of the tensions, of the demonstrations, of protests. I didn't understand it maybe until I got into seminary, when I really began to wrestle, living in Atlanta. And I was down there in Auburn Avenue, Ebenezer Baptist Church. I was trying to understand here what that was all about. But it was when I came to Charlotte as a pastor back in 1996 that there was a shooting death of James Willie Cooper by an African American, unarmed, by a white police officer, and the city erupted when the DA didn't bring charges. And a pastor in the community invited pastors to come together. And so then I started thinking not just what happened with, post-slavery through the civil rights, Jim Crow, segregation, all that, and then the desegregation of schools. I mean, I had some relation to that, but I started wondering, what is it really like to be black in the South? And then I realized I can't answer that. I'll never be able to understand that as a white male who represents the power and the privilege of the leadership of this country for centuries. So I wanted to see if I could learn a little more in a diverse group, maybe learn something that I hadn't known before.
So then, being a part of that initiative, the the Racial Healing and Social Justice Initiative. What did you learn? What did you guys learn?
I learned history that I had never, ever heard even a whisper about. No idea that how ingrained the prejudice was in our financial systems, how ingrained it was in the political systems, and the usurping control of every aspect of life after slavery. It never was equal. And to learn the history and the towns that were people of color, and they were destroyed for no reason except who they were. And to learn all of the, it's just, follow the money, follow the power. And that was really enlightening to me. And I horrible as it was, I thoroughly enjoyed learning that. And that made me understand where it all came from, because it didn't just pop up overnight.
Right.
And it isn't in just one place.
So Judy, you mentioned something offline earlier. The fact that not only blacks, African Americans are discriminated against, but what other groups of people?
Oh my gosh, there was, and I don't remember the dates, so I'm not really good at that, but there was a list held by lenders of people in order of priority to give money to. And on that list were Native Americans, Italians, Irishmen. They called them Orientals back there, folks from Asia, the black folks, and different categories of risk based on where they came from and the color of their skin. And that's what lenders used to prioritize. And that to me was just astounding, because folks with skin similar to Anglo white males, English white males, were able to assimilate faster over generations, faster into the society. We don't really think about the XYZ Irish, and I've heard the expressions, and I won't say that, but they were name called until they started to integrate into the population because they could blend. Those who could not blend were the them and stayed the them, and the others became the us. And then they started being prejudiced against the them, and following what their historical background had experienced, they imposed on others. And it just blew me away that was actually what happened. And again, to understand that history makes a big, big difference in the way I think, and in the way that I think if people knew more of that, they would begin to understand as well and appreciate how deep this goes.
See, one of the things I learned on the history was that most of the textbooks that I read and was taught from as a child were written by white people. So there was something of a skew or a bias or even a revisionist kind of history at play, perhaps. I mean, you don't know that as a child. But then to hear how over years the societal constructs actually affect the systems and the institutions of this great country, and many people aren't even aware of it unless you happen to be black and are trying to get a job or rent an apartment or buy a car, and then you find that the obstacles are they're twice as high, they're maybe 10 times as high as if you're white. I've been working at this, learning about this a little bit over the years, and I think the biggest impact of participating for these 4 months was the call that I feel to stand up, not to lead amongst marginalized black communities, but to speak up in the white community where I've come from and where I am in a leadership role, although our church is already becoming more and more diverse, but to invite the white folks that of my age and some older and some younger to think again. Maybe there's more to the history of this country, and then maybe we'd understand why people are marching in the streets. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace, or shouting Black Lives Matter, or things that just sort of get people frightened and defensive who are, of my generation plus and minus. So So it's not comfortable work.
Oh, so that's our next question. How did you feel being in those classes? What was it like for you? Yeah, how did you feel?
I kept flipping back between angry and sad. And very, very, very deeply in both of those.
Angry because?
Angry because it happened. Sad because it happened.
John?
Yeah, I think I had both of those feelings. But in the end, I felt a sense of call and being compelled to do something. And this is interesting. We're having this conversation now after the recent deaths of African Americans in this country. We didn't know this was going to happen. And we were feeling this compelling, drive to address this and get after it. And particularly as a white person speaking to other white people, to say, wait a minute, maybe you need to think a little more, go a little deeper here. Think about something that you just hadn't heard before because you hadn't listened deeply to the one who was affected or oppressed or was suffering. And so I guess, I hear a lot of folks, we don't want to go back there. It was painful. We don't want to go back there. Civil rights happened. They have their opportunity. It's an equal playing field. That's what we really learned. It is not an equal playing field. You can't just say, get your college education, get your job, and you're fine. No. Yeah. We have a lot of work to do to make it a more fair game to play, equal opportunity. That's what justice is. Yes. So that everybody, doesn't matter who you are. And I understand all lives matter. Sure they do. Yes. But right now, we've got part of the life, if you look at a finger on the hand, one of these is really bruised and really hurting. And we need to pay attention to that.
Yes.
So, and then create a world where there's more equal opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, what was your takeaway, Judy, from
I knew you were
all the learning?
I knew you were, Pastor Lisa. One of the things that made me angry was that the followers of Christ allowed this to happen. Made me very angry. And I think that's one of the things we need to look at now. Do we let it go? And I say no.
So if we're not going to let it go, then what are we going to do?
What do we do? Well, that is kind of the question. And I think that's where, the churches and society are really trying to come together to figure out what the next steps, the right steps are. But no steps is not the answer.
Amen.
I think that's the thing to remember. And if we walk with Jesus, we can't let this happen.
Amen.
He wouldn't.
Thank you. John?
So as a church, we aren't done yet. We have a lot of work to do. We need to listen deeply. We need to think about forgiveness. We need to wonder, what does the ministry of reconciliation that Paul describes, what does that mean for us now? And our relationships with people across economic or racial or cultural lines is critical to it. So everybody can do something on that front personally. But then we can begin to think about how, as a collective body, this church, which is being more welcoming of all people in this community, how we can then address not just how do you be friends with people who are different, but how do you, as now friends in Christ, come against the systemic power, the evil, the injustice, the oppression, as our baptismal covenant says. Thank you for bringing that up on Sunday morning. In whatever forms they present themselves, let's pay attention to what forms of evil, injustice, and oppression are expressed now, and then figure out, as a unified body, how to move against that.
Amen. So I want to say, as we come to a close, our conversations are not just to sit and look at each other, just to pass some time, but our conversations are to help everyone in the congregation, everyone who is viewing, to get involved in some way. And I must say that God has called all of us to do something, no matter how small or how large. God has called each and every one of us to do something. So we invite you at home to come and be a part of this great work, so that God might be glorified and humankind would be lifted.
Amen.
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 Thank you.
Agreed.
So what are you going to do? See you next week.